What if the dish you've ordered from a Chinese takeout menu your entire life was actually invented in America? What if the spice that defines Chinese cooking in the Western imagination never once appeared in a Chinese kitchen until traders brought it from South America? What if Chinese food, as the world knows, it is actually one of the greatest origin story myths in culinary history? The truth is, China didn't invent most of what you think it did, and that changes everything. Welcome to Dish Atlas. Hit subscribe because this one is going to surprise you. Food number 1: fortune cookies. Fortune cookies are so synonymous with Chinese dining that most Americans assume they traveled over with the first Chinese immigrants. Ancient wisdom baked into a crisp golden fold. But here's the truth. Fortune cookies were invented in early 20th century California, and the most likely creator was a Japanese man named Makoto Hagiwara, a landscape designer who served them at the Japanese Tea Garden in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park around 1914. Some historians point to David Young, a Chinese immigrant in Los Angeles, as a rival claimant, but either way, the story stays firmly on American soil. The cookie itself is based on a centuries-old Japanese temple cracker called tsujura senbei, folded around a small paper fortune. China had never heard of them until American tourists started asking. Today, roughly 3 billion fortune cookies are manufactured every year almost entirely in the United States, and the largest factory producing them is in Brooklyn, New York. They are the most successful food myth ever sold, a symbol of Chinese culture invented on the other side of the Pacific by people who were never Chinese at all. Sometimes, belonging is a story we tell ourselves until it becomes true. Food number 2: chop suey. Chop suey was once the most famous Chinese dish in America, piled high in steaming bowls served in thousands of Chinese restaurants from New York to San Francisco, and eaten by millions of people who believed they were tasting something ancient and authentic. They weren't. Chop suey was born in the United States, most likely in New York City, in the late 1800s, cobbled together by Chinese immigrant laborers who needed to feed hungry American workers with whatever scraps were left in the kitchen. The name itself comes from the Cantonese tiesap suey, meaning miscellaneous leftovers. That's it. That's the whole recipe. What the world romanticized as exotic Eastern cuisine was, at its core, a survival dish, a poor man's scramble dressed up in a borrowed identity. By 1900, chop suey parlors had exploded across American cities, and the dish became so popular that it sparked what historians call the first American craze for ethnic food. It never existed in China. When Chinese visitors came to America and were served chop suey in restaurants, they didn't recognize it at all. Reinvention, it turns out, can taste like home, even when home never made it. Food number 3: General Tso's chicken. Walk into almost any Chinese-American restaurant today, and General Tso's chicken sits at the center of the menu. Crimson sticky, impossibly satisfying with that addictive balance of sweet heat and crunch that keeps you reaching back into the bowl. But General Tso's chicken was not born in China. It was created in New York City in the early 1970s by a Hunanese chef named Peng Changkui, who had fled mainland China after the Communist Revolution and eventually landed in Manhattan. Peng named the dish after Zhuo Zongtang, a celebrated 19th century Qing dynasty general from Hunan province, as a gesture of regional pride. But the flavor profile that was pure American adaptation. The original version Peng made in Taiwan was far less sweet, far more austere. When he moved it to New York, sugar stepped in to meet American appetites, and the dish transformed almost overnight. When General Tso's chicken was later introduced to China food critics, they found it bewildering. Too sweet, too heavy, nothing like Hunanese cooking at all. One man's nostalgia filtered through a foreign palate became the best-selling Chinese dish in American history. That's not dilution, that's evolution. Food number 4: egg rolls. Egg rolls are the universal opening act of the Chinese-American dining experience. That first crispy golden cylinder arriving at the table, in a little paper sleeve steam curling from the broken end, the smell of hot oil and cabbage hitting you before it even lands. This is the first food that my mind gravitates towards when you say Chinese food. But the egg roll as Americans know it, big, doughy, deep-fried, stuffed with pork and cabbage, is an American invention likely developed in New York City's Chinese immigrant community sometime in the 1930s. The closest Chinese ancestor is the spring roll, a far more delicate creature. Thin rice paper lightly fried or fresh eaten across southern China and Southeast Asia for centuries during the Spring Festival. But somewhere between Guangdong Province and a Lower East Side kitchen, the recipe got reinvented entirely. The wrapper thickened, the filling changed, the frying got deeper. Some food historians credit a New York restaurateur named Lum Fong with popularizing the modern egg roll around 1935, though the exact origin remains deliciously disputed. What isn't disputed is this: the egg roll became the single most ordered appetizer in American Chinese cuisine, a dish that China itself never cooked. Transformation, not tradition, built this one from scratch. Food number 5, chow mein. Chow mein has the comfortable familiarity of a dish that feels like it has always existed. Those soft or crispy noodles tangled with vegetables and soy-glossed protein served in millions of takeout containers every single night across America, Britain, and Australia. And unlike some foods on this list, chow mein does have genuine Chinese roots. The name comes from the Mandarin chow mein, meaning stir-fried noodles. And noodle cooking has existed in China for over 4,000 years. But the version the world eats today, that's a different story entirely. Chinese-American chow mein, thick, gloppy, built around bean sprouts and celery, and drenched in a cornstarch-thickened sauce, bears almost no resemblance to anything served in China. It was reshaped by Cantonese immigrants in 19th-century California who adapted their cooking to local ingredients they could actually find, substituting and improvising until something new emerged. In Butte, Montana, of all places, chow mein became so embedded in local culture that the city developed its own distinct regional version still celebrated there today. A 4,000-year-old tradition quietly reinvented in the American West by people simply trying to eat something that felt like home. Food number 6, Kung Pao chicken. Kung Pao chicken carries the kind of name that sounds like it was pulled straight from the heart of ancient Chinese culinary tradition, bold, dramatic, unmistakably foreign to Western ears, with that fiery, peanut-studded sauce that coats every cube of chicken in something dangerously addictive. And here's where this story gets interesting, because unlike most foods on this list, Kung Pao chicken is genuinely Chinese in origin. It was named after Ding Baojun, a 19th-century Qing dynasty governor of Sichuan province, whose honorary title was Gong Bao, meaning palace guardian. The dish was reportedly his personal obsession. Tender chicken-dried chilies and roasted peanuts tumbled together in a wok over screaming heat. But during China's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s, the dish was actually banned. Declared a symbol of feudal elitism, because of its imperial associations, it went underground, survived in secret, and re-emerged after the revolution ended. Then it traveled to America, where the sauce got sweeter, the heat got milder, and a new version was born entirely. The American iteration became so different that China and the United States essentially cooked two separate dishes sharing one legendary name. Survival reinvention and a governor's personal appetite all folded into a single wok. Food number 7, fried rice. Fried rice feels like the oldest, most honest item on any Chinese menu. Humble, satisfying, the kind of dish that seems like it has fed civilizations for millennia. Built from leftover rice, tossed in a screaming hot wok with egg and soy and whatever the kitchen had to spare. And in its basic form, it genuinely is ancient. Fried rice has existed in China since at least the Suey dynasty around 600 AD, born from the very practical need to use day-old rice that had dried out overnight and was too stiff to eat any other way. But the version most of the world recognizes: American fried rice, Thai fried rice, Hawaiian fried rice loaded with pineapple and Spam. Those are entirely separate inventions wearing borrowed clothes. In Thailand, fish sauce and basil replace soy. In Hawaii, Spam entered the wok after World War II military supply chains flooded the islands with canned meat. In American Chinese restaurants, the dish became sweeter, heavier, built around a flavor profile that Sui dynasty cooks would never recognize. Even the wok technique used in most Western kitchens produces a fundamentally different result than the fierce, smoke-kissed wok hei, literally breath of the wok, that defines authentic Chinese fried rice. The dish belongs to China, but the world made it their own anyway. Food number 8. Dim sum. Dim sum feels like the most authentically, irreducibly Chinese dining experience in the world. Those bamboo steamers stacked ceiling high, the rattling trolleys navigating packed dining rooms, the translucent folds of hargo glistening under fluorescent light, the ritual of pouring tea before anything else touches the table. And dim sum is genuinely Chinese-born along the ancient Silk Road, in the tea houses of Guangdong province, where weary travelers would stop to rest and take yum cha, meaning drink tea, with small plates of food served alongside. But the elaborate, sprawling, trolley-wheeled institution that Chinese communities around the world recognize today, that specific ceremony was largely shaped not in China, but in Hong Kong in the mid-20th century. It was Hong Kong's urban tea house culture that transformed dim sum from a modest roadside rest stop tradition into a full theatrical dining event, codifying the rotating carts, the stamp cards, the sheer overwhelming variety of over 1,000 documented dim sum dishes. When that culture emigrated to San Francisco's Chinatown, to London's Gerrard Street, to Sydney's Haymarket, it carried Hong Kong's version with it, not the Silk Road original. What the world calls authentically Chinese is actually authentically Hong Kongese, and that distinction, small as it sounds, carries the weight of an entire identity. Food number 9, sweet and sour pork. Sweet and sour pork is the dish that introduced an entire generation of Westerners to Chinese food. That lacquered, crimson-glazed plate arriving at the table like a small triumph. Chunks of pork fried to a shatteringly crisp shell and drowned in a sauce so glossy it catches the light. China does have a genuine tradition of balancing sweet and sour flavors. Tangku cooking stretches back centuries in Jiangsu and Hunan provinces, where vinegar and sugar were combined to create complex layered sauces for braised meats. But the neon orange, pineapple-studded, cornstarch-thickened version that conquered Western Chinese restaurants in the 20th century, that was engineered specifically for foreign palates, most likely in the Cantonese immigrant communities of 19th century Britain and America. Food historians believe early Chinese restaurant owners deliberately amplified the sweetness and simplified the flavor profile because Western diners found the authentic version too sharp, too sour, too unfamiliar. They weren't dumbing it down, they were translating it. Pineapple, which appears in virtually no traditional Chinese cooking, entered the dish purely because Western customers associated it with exotic indulgence. The result was a dish that became more popular internationally than almost anything actually eaten in China. Sometimes the translation outsells the original. Food number 10, chili peppers in Chinese cooking. Sichuan food without chili peppers is almost impossible to imagine. That volcanic, lip-numbing, sweat-inducing heat is so fundamental to the cuisine that it feels like it must have been there since the beginning of Chinese civilization itself, buried deep in the DNA of one of the world's oldest culinary traditions. But chili peppers are native to the Americas, every single one of them. Indigenous civilizations in Mexico and Central America had been cultivating them for thousands of years before Chinese cooks ever saw one. They only entered Eurasia after Columbus returned from the Caribbean in 1493, and they did not reach inland China until the late Ming period, likely sometime in the late 1500s or early 1600s. That means the ingredient now inseparable from Sichuan cuisine has only been there for about 4 centuries, a blink in the lifespan of Chinese civilization. Before chilies arrived, Sichuan's famous heat came from a different arsenal entirely: Sichuan peppercorns with their numbing citrus bite, fresh ginger pungent mustard, and aromatic herbs. The region already understood how to build intensity. It just hadn't met the chili yet. And then it did. Once peppers entered China through trade routes from the south and west, they spread with astonishing speed. They were cheap to grow, easy to preserve, and perfect for inland provinces where humid weather and simple staple foods made bold flavor especially welcome. In poorer regions, chilies did something even more important. They made plain food feel alive. A bowl of rice, a pot of vegetables, a bit of preserved meat, suddenly all of it had force. In Sichuan, the chili didn't replace the old flavor system. It fused with it. The numbing buzz of Sichuan peppercorn met the deep, straightforward fire of the chili, and together they created one of the most distinctive taste signatures on earth, mala numbing and hot. Not ancient in the way most people imagine, but no less real for being adopted later. That's the thing about food traditions. If a culture embraces something, completely cooks with it for generations, and builds memory around it, eventually adoption stops feeling borrowed. It becomes identity. Today, China is the world's largest producer and consumer of chili peppers. The ingredient that once crossed the Pacific as a foreign botanical curiosity now defines entire regional cuisines in the global imagination. When people think of Sichuan, they think red oil, dried chilies, hot pot steam, and that electric sting on the lips. One of the most Chinese flavors on the planet came from the Americas, slipped into China through trade, and rooted itself so deeply that the old origin story disappeared. And maybe that's the real point of this list. Fortune cookies, chop suey, General Tso's chicken egg rolls, chow, Mengkung pao, chicken fried rice, dim sum, sweet and sour pork, even the chili pepper itself. None of these stories are as simple as the menu makes them look. Some were invented in America. Some were translated for foreign palates. Some are undeniably Chinese but changed shape in Hong Kong, New York, California, Bangkok, Honolulu, and everywhere else they landed. A few are old. A few are shockingly new. Almost all of them are hybrid. That's what happens when people move. Recipes move with them. Ingredients cross oceans. Names survive even when methods change. A dish leaves one country as memory arrives in another as necessity and comes back wearing a new face. Then the world eats it for long enough that the reinvention starts to feel ancient. Not because anyone is trying to lie, but because food is one of the fastest ways culture remakes itself. So no, China didn't invent every dish the world calls Chinese. But that doesn't make these foods fake. It makes them evidence. Evidence of migration, of adaptation, of restaurant owners reading the room and rewriting a recipe to survive, of homesickness turned into business, of trade routes quietly altering national identity, one ingredient at a time. The plate in front of you is never just a plate. It's history after being chopped, fried, sweetened, renamed, exported, and remembered imperfectly. And maybe that's why food myths last so long, because they're comforting. We want clean origins. We want one dish, one country, one story. But real food history is messier than that and much more interesting. 10 foods, 10 origin myths cracked open, 10 reminders that what we call authentic is often just the version that won. If this video changed the way you see your takeout menu, hit like and subscribe to Dish Atlas. And tell us in the comments which one shocked you the most. Next time you crack open a fortune cookie, order General Tso's, or feel that Sichuan heat creeping up your tongue, remember you're not just tasting China. You're tasting the path food took to reach you, with every detour, compromise, and reinvention still hidden in the flavor. That's the real story.